Hello, everyone. My name is Julianne Meyer, and I am the host of Own Your Wellness. Welcome, welcome. If this is your first time joining us, you're in for a treat. And I have a returning guest, and I'm excited because I adore her, and she's got so much to offer. So without further ado, let's bring her on. Her name is Jennifer Peavey. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. It's great to see you again.
You too. And once again, love the background. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But for those that didn't catch you the first time, I would love for you to share a bit about yourself and your own wellness journey.
Sure. So Jennifer Peavey, I have a varied background as far as a career. I was in engineering and innovation and design and found myself entering the pandemic unemployed. So it was my first time really to be able to try to figure out what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. And I created some structure in my life. And I was able to have moments where I would sit and say, what do I really want to do? And I've now labeled that, I was reflecting. But what I was doing was reflecting on what I wanted to be and what I was going to do and what my actions would be. And I found if I had a cycle between those two, I found that I was able to trust myself more. I was more excited about what I was working on. I was making higher quality choices. I could prove that I was being successful. And I felt like that was something, particularly during the pandemic, that kind of peace and joy was something that I wanted to share with others.
I love that. And I love the idea of it having actual ways to document how you're doing, because, there's all these like catchphrases out there like wellness. Well, what is that?
Right.
But if you can't, track how you're doing, then how do you honestly know? And to me, I'm a very spiritual person. But one of the reasons why I chose the spiritual mentor that I have is because one of the things he says is, if you can't do something in your physical life with what you're learning, then it really isn't real. So
yeah,
I was like, yes.
Yeah. It's kind of like talking about your dreams, but
Yeah,
about them. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like, these cycles that you're talking about, or, the moments of reflection versus the other times.
Yeah. So what I was doing, because I came from these three varied backgrounds, engineering, innovation, and design, they all had their own processes. And typically, if you've ever worked with any of these people, they are in conflict with one another. So one of the things I wanted to do was find something brand new. And I was already following a couple of women who were looking at ancient wisdom and applying it to modern management practices. And so one of the things was following the moon. And so what I was doing was taking the light of the moon and using it as a timepiece. One of the problems that I have, if you want to call it a problem, is I get very excited about something and it's almost like a dog with a bone. I am spending way too much time on it. And the nice thing about this timepiece, it would say, okay, you have 3 days or you have 4 days or whatever it was. And I assigned each moon phase a particular task. So when there was less light, like at a new moon, that was a time where I would review everything that I'd done the past moon, and I would sit with it and I would say, okay, what went well? What did I succeed at? Where were the things that shocked me, and good or bad? And there were a couple times I would let things go. And then, with each phase, there was a different focus to that task. But by the time I got to the full moon, I was dealing with a lot of action because there was a lot of light. And then, of course, we would go back through again with less and less light, less action, and more reflection until I got back to the beginning again. And the nice thing is, 29 days or 28 days is a large enough chunk that you can get something done, but a small enough chunk that I could say, you know what, none of that worked well. Just wipe the slate clean and let's start all over with something else. So instead of it being a year later or a quarter later, or I invested way too much in myself. So I really found that to be powerful, is to be able to go back and forth in this cycle.
I love that, because I'm one of those people too, where I'm a dog with a bone. I get so focused that I don't even notice if something's working or not for me, or, overly invested. I get overly invested in something with about zero return. Yes. And I mean, a perfect example of that would be social media.
Yes. I know. When does this end?
I know. I mean, you can look at your phone for 5 minutes and then realize it's been 30. So, I love the idea of putting my life in a cycle or a phase, so that I can still enjoy what I want to enjoy, but, it's time for me to move on to something else or see what I'm doing with this. So I love that.
It also changes the scope of
Mhm.
what I was trying to do. So, for example, at the first quarter moon is when I make a prototype. Well,
Mm.
I tell myself, look, you only have 3 days. So, therefore, it really defines what am I going to try to get done in that 3 days, as opposed
Yeah.
to dreaming everything it could be, which really is a 6 month or a year-long project. And I'm,
Mhm.
forever in it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You can get stuck in the research phase too,
Yes.
or, all these
Yes.
different things where it's like, okay, yeah, I like the idea of having time constraints too, because I mean, everybody who, in the personal growth industry is always talking about things like, all right, you give yourself a goal, you set a time limit, then cut it in half, the time limit. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I understand the reason behind it,
Yeah.
because you actually do what you say you're going to do because you have this amount of time.
Well, and part of it too is one of the things I did in 2020 was only look at a single moon. In
Mm.
2021, I looked at the whole year with these little single moons, running within it. So then I could say, okay, I want to do this larger thing. Well, let
Hmm.
me break it into 12 or 13 bites.
Oh,
And
I
so at
love
that
that.
moment, I would only have to worry about this one little brick, like I was building a brick wall and I was only putting this one little brick in it. And then that allowed me to have smaller successes and really work on that self trust and seeing that I was being successful. And so part of it in that 3 day prototype or whatever it is, I would say, okay, what am I trying to learn? Because there's this bigger arc that I'm trying to get to. May not be what I'm
Mhm.
doing this particular moon is the final anything, but
Mhm.
it might be I'm learning something like what is the most effective thing on social media? Is it about likes? Is it about comments? It might be that you're trying to learn something in the middle of that. And that's all you're trying to do.
And then, of course, when you have that focus, it's like, what's that saying? A jack of all trades and a master of none, or something along those
Yes.
lines. When
Yes.
your focus is so spread out, you get about 0%. I mean, in
Right.
comparison,
Right.
the
Right.
quality goes down significantly.
Right. I had somebody talking about having basically 3 buckets. And you'd say, I'm really only working on these 3 things. And I think that's more of a mental, I've got these 3 buckets. Now there could be, 20 things in each of those buckets, but and it looks to other people like you're all over the place, but it's like, no, this is all about this one thing.
Yeah. No, I love that idea so much. And then I keep on thinking about the moon, though, in particular, because I was watching that Will Smith show. Did you happen
Mhm.
to catch any of that? About when, anyway, it's called Welcome to Earth, I believe.
Mhm.
And he does like all these big adventure things. And one of the things that he did was go down inside an active volcano.
Oh, wow.
And so, and they were talking about like the sound of it, which was
Yes.
absolutely fascinating. But anyway, one of the things that they were talking about was that, the moon and the moon phases and how, the moon affects the ocean
Mhm.
but the thing that I didn't know that I think is absolutely fascinating is it actually moves Earth too, like the ground. So New York City, and this is a fact, and I love this one. New
Uh-huh.
York City rises and falls every single day, 14 inches. That's 14 inches every single day. And that's
Oh, my
because
word.
of the moon. So I just wanted to share that because I just thought that, that's the power of the moon.
That
So,
is.
and that's why I love so much that you were, working with the moon in your
Yeah.
project.
Yeah. 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 I think part of it too was it was a constant reminder. I
Yeah.
have a dog, and so there are lots
Physical.
of times yes, exactly. Lots of times you have to walk them out, or not have to, but I get to walk her outside, and then there's the moon. And
Yeah.
I got to the point I started trying to figure out, okay, do I know where it's supposed to be? Because of where it was in the phase. And so it gave me this connection outside of myself, particularly during the pandemic when, you're at home, or for me, was alone, and you just feel a little isolated. And this
Yeah.
idea of being able to connect to something outside the window, it helped me and gave me hope.
And also knowing that everybody on the planet can see the same thing is kind
Yes.
of, that's one of those things too that helps connect when we feel isolated. So,
Yep.
I mean, especially, even if you might be in a relationship, it doesn't mean like you automatically don't feel lonely. These
Right.
things happen. So,
Right.
I love that idea of being able to connect with the world in a larger sense in the confines of your personal space.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it ironic though, is how well you can see the moon but yet you can't take a picture of it. You know,
I
you go
never
out
even
there.
really
Yeah, because I'm always like, oh, let's get the moon up there. And it ends up this little white dot.
I know, super bright usually, and I'm
Super
like,
bright
"Okay."
and it's huge and all this stuff, and I get a little white dot. I know it requires
Exactly.
special equipment to even be able to see it, but I can see it. So I think
Yeah.
that's amazing too, is it kind of hides itself.
I never even thought about that. That is
Yeah.
actually that's an interesting observation when you think about that, huh?
Like, I'll let you see me, but you don't get to take it home. You know, you don't get to.
Exactly. Exactly, it's a reminder to be present because you don't get to
Yeah,
take that yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I love that. So, I would love for you to share a little bit about what's going on behind you.
Yes. So moon, and I'll pick, let's see, this one, because I'm mirrored. This is probably a good one. So these are a number of pieces of string art. Right now I've got
Okay.
about 50 of them. And in fact, this one I made because it was a full moon. This is number 50. And it was just celebrating that entire thing. And so what you can see from let me get the camera
Oh,
right. You
yeah.
can see the nails.
Mhm.
And then we've got a lot of thread in there rather than yarn is what I wanted to do with it. So part of the time during the pandemic is I was developing my own structure and my process. And this is one of the things I actually ran through it, was saying, okay, I want to make these. I want to
Mhm.
learn how to make these. What is the most efficient way so that I can, make a little bit of money, but make it worth my time? And also what would make it enjoyable? So one of the
Mhm.
things was I wanted to make sure that the nails could not be seen.
Mm.
That all you would see is the thread.
Yeah.
Hopefully, particularly those behind me, you can, and it takes a lot to be able to see this. So there is the idea that, okay, I could buy nails and paint them. Well, then I
Mhm.
got to wait for them to dry. And then I've got fabric wrapped around the base. So then you got to, kind of messes up the fabric and you're like, I don't really like that. Then I could buy them already
Mhm.
colored. So, but that's a little too expensive. So I ended up going back to the engineering part and saying, hey, you can heat treat them. And I could
Oh.
do it in my oven. And I actually turned them a really dark blue or a really dark brown. I shot for purple, but I didn't quite get to it. But they're dark enough that you really can't see it. Now, probably if you were here, you would be able to see it. But yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah, so it's a lot of
Something else that I really want to point out about this in particular is the fact that you have this background in so many different things. It gives permission for other people to step outside of their quote unquote box, you know?
yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to be an engineer for the rest of your life just because that's
No,
what you went to school for.
no, no. And in fact, I tell people, yes, I have 2 degrees in engineering, but I never used them. So, it's a very interesting thing about what you choose to do and how you choose
Mhm.
to do it. I've got a nephew right now that's about to graduate from high school, and he's trying to choose his college. And I went back to him. I said, "It's really about the network. Do you
Yes.
prefer this particular state? Do you prefer that particular state or this particular industry? Other than that, it's a piece of paper, but it's about the people you meet
Mhm.
that makes a difference in what you're going to end up doing."
And also who you become during the process. I
Yeah.
think that that is really what people miss. It's like you said,
Yep.
it's literally a piece of paper
Yep.
that you
Yep.
end up with. But
Yep.
who do you become?
Right.
That's the real
Yep.
way more. Yeah. No, I love that. I love that so much because, you know, I'm somebody who went to school to become a pharmacist.
Yep.
And because I went to school in Canada and I'm an American, long story short, you have to do your bachelor's degree first before I could even get considered for pharmacy school. And
Right.
so I did my 4 years in biochemistry. And this entire time I worked in pharmacy. And, you know, the one thing I learned during those 4 years is I didn't want to do this.
Yes. 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 And that's a good
I was
thing to
like,
know.
I'm
No.
done.
Yeah. No is a very good answer.
I'm like, I don't care that I spent this much money on my education and but it hasn't been a waste. It literally has
No.
not been a waste. And the thing that's fascinating too is I went to art school in Italy after that.
Okay.
And I happen to be really, really good at mimicking other people's art. So I can, copy it basically. I'm going to
Right.
be really good at that. And so one of my art teachers said to me, you'd make a great art restorationist. And the only problem is you have to learn all this science, biochemistry. And I was like, oh,
Right.
well,
Done
I
that.
already have that.
Done it.
So, it's not necessarily a waste anyway. Like maybe you
Right.
don't use your engineering in a typical sense, but hasn't
Right.
it influenced other things in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just the probably the confidence in problem solving. Saying,
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to figure this out. We're going to figure this out. Part of it is knowing what is reasonable, because you can dream up things, but I think we talked earlier about you dream, but you don't always act upon things. So it's important to be able to make them real, and that's the part of me that's about the applied. It wants to make sure that this is going to go somewhere, and so definitely, it's part of that. I think the other thing is, at least in that world, I'm a bit of an info junkie. And so it allows me to learn a little bit about a lot of things. So I've got a breadth, but part of that, I don't know if it comes first, kind of like a chicken and egg, but I'm a cross pollinator. So it's this idea of taking that little bit from over there and that little bit of over there and go, oh, you know what would happen if we put it together, which could be chemistry, if you wanted to say that, and you get a different spark or an explosion with that. But that I think is part of definitely some sort of STEM background, is being able to see some of those connections.
And I love that because, I think especially like what I talk about mostly is, like the medical industry and health and wellness, and there's no overlap. Like there's no, okay, this is how you do things. Like if you have a diagnosis, well, what are you supposed to do with that besides take medicine? I mean, there's so many other things that you can do. Whereas if somebody like you're like, well, let's see here. Let's see. I don't need to get all my answers from one spot. I can go here and here and here and figure out what works for me.
Yeah. The other thing about engineering was that it was okay that you didn't have the answer in your head, because you would go to the library or there would be a book somewhere. As long as you knew where the answer was, it was okay. Now I know medicine, they cram so much of it in their head. Part of it, though, was finding that answer and putting those together. Like you said, it could be all over the place.
Yeah.
But being able to say, what would happen if we put all that together? There was at one point that I had a particular engineering project where we had 40 different variables. And I was able to see what it took when we were going through computer-aided modeling and that type of thing. But 40 different variables. That was for that system. And I realized how complicated that was. Now, I happened to be going through a time period where I was trying to get pregnant and I was infertile. So I was dealing with the medical profession. I was sitting here going, okay, let's talk through this. Or how can I encourage this? I knew I couldn't fix everything. The body's very complicated. But it was interesting to be able to think about, okay, there's 1,000 to 1,000,000 variables going on in this body. I barely understood the 40. How in the world does a person understand all of those thousands?
Yeah.
So it was interesting to be able to say, okay, we're going to try this and see what happens. We're going to try that and see what happens.
And having that patience.
Yeah.
Having that patience is important with anything. It's like, you wouldn't, I use this example all the time, but it's just the best one. You wouldn't expect a baby to walk the very first time it tries. So, why are you expecting this out of yourself with everything in your life?
Yeah. There was another, in fact, one of the women that influenced me to go towards the moon, one of her, I wouldn't say cliche, but one of her sayings is she talks about, if you were planting a vineyard, you put the grapevines in the ground, it'll be 3 years before you see grapes so that you can make some wine, but it'll be 7 years before you're abundant. So this idea of startup companies being multi-billionaires in 2 years is really not realistic. But we say that, but we often the times they've been working for 10 or 20 years. They've been all these little things that they have been doing, 10 years to an overnight success.
And it's not, we're not saying that that's impossible. It's just very unlikely.
Yes.
But you did bring up a really, really good point. There's all this background stuff that's been building up and growing and learning for all those years that maybe weren't necessarily in that particular business venture in that particular moment or whatnot, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't leading up to that. So all of that, you know, our whole lives are leading us somewhere. So
Exactly. So you got to be open.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. So what other, I mean, we're going to talk about this when we come back from the commercial, but you've been doing some new stuff and I'm pretty excited about this. So I definitely want to talk about that right when we come back.
Yep.
But before we do, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you are offering right now.
So yes, so last August, there was the ebook and the paperback for my book, Natural Reflectors. Right now, any day, the audiobook will be coming out. You know, you kind of watch on ACX or Audible going, I go and I hit it probably 3 or 4 times a day. Did it publish? Did it publish? Because we're going through quality checks. And then hopefully I also have offered a journal at Christmas, and it basically was just a companion journal to go with the book. And then I said, okay, well, let's make one for the spring. And so that's another thing that I'm working on offering right now. It's basically a blank journal, but, you know, giving somebody a place if they want to collect their thoughts or scribble on it or do, you know, shopping lists. I'm perfectly fine. It's good to do whatever with it.
Well, to get it out of your brain too, or, you know, sometimes it's nice to just get that out so it's not taking up rent, you know, taking up space in your head. But what do you think is important about journaling?
So for me, there are 2 different things. My brain will spin a great deal. And if I'm writing, it slows down. So then I'm only dealing with that one thing at a time. So it's something about the physicality of it that allows my brain to focus on what is happening. It also then, for me, being able to reflect back, like in the new moon, I will actually read the past moon's journaling. And there'll be things from 20 days earlier that I'll have completely forgotten that happened. You know, somebody made me angry and I was really upset that day. And it's like gone. It's been gone for weeks. And it's amazing to me then to tell me again, you know, things come and go and things happen. And just because today wasn't so good doesn't mean tomorrow isn't going to be better. And it keeps me more on an even keel on being able to look back at that and have that there.
No, and I love that too, because it, you know, it puts into perspective. You don't even remember. It's been like a couple weeks and you don't even remember. But in that particular moment, it was so like mind consuming and dramatic.
Or the flip side of it is the positive.
Yeah, that's the one that I wish we'd hold on to more.
Yeah, maybe the one thing I was worried about, and it turned out that it was actually a blessing, or it was something that worked really well, or the engineer in me kept piling on all sorts of details into a project. But I found out that 2 weeks ago, I met the intention that I had set out at the very beginning of the moon, and therefore I can define success, even though I wasn't feeling successful because I'd added all these things and they weren't working and I was frustrated. But it was like, no, you did what you set out to do. And so that's another reason I love writing it down.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, you know, something else that I really like too about defining your success is that for somebody like you and myself, because I'm like this too, it's like you said, I can be completely successful and I don't feel like it. And so therefore I might not recognize and celebrate myself because I don't feel like it at that particular moment. But, you know, feelings come and go quickly.
Exactly.
And to have like a measurable, you know, something to measure, then you can say, okay, I did this. Good. And like you said, you know, you set out to do what you said you were going to do and you did it. So that is like, okay, my brain can wrap around that no matter what my feelings are.
Exactly.
I'm like, yes, I have that. Well, on that note, we should go to commercial break. So we're going to be back in just a moment. Okay.
Good.
All right, everyone. We will be back in just a moment. But for those of you who are watching us live, hello, you are appreciated. And we'll be back in just a moment.
Are you someone who is struggling to move forward because you suffered a loss? Maybe you're even finding it difficult to complete the most basic tasks. Are you looking for a way to start enjoying life again without feeling guilty or the resistance to do so? Spiritual life coach Sarah Stockham saw a need for people who haven't learned how to grieve without putting their entire lives on pause. And so she created a program that solves this issue called Choosing Life Right Now. This program is simple and you can do it on your own. If you are ready to learn how to feel your grief while still being able to smile, to honor the sacredness of what took place as a loss, and yet still continue to live with joy, and if you'd like to take care of your whole being with grace and love, then I'd like to invite you to experience her new program called Choosing Life Right Now. Sarah is currently offering her program for the promotional price of $77, but it won't stay at this price for long. To learn more, check out her website. The address is on the screen.
When drug or alcohol addiction take over, things begin to disappear. Your friends, your family, and eventually, you. Recommended by Dr. Phil, New Method Wellness can help get your life back with individualized treatment plans for dual diagnosis clients. New Method Wellness provides the most highly credentialed treatment in a safe and welcome environment. Call New Method Wellness for your free consultation and ask about our national accreditations. Together, we can put the pieces back together.
Now, you can vibrationally align your aura. You can gain a larger and spiritual perspective on life, relationships, God, people, wellness, and money. You can also have moments of meditation and reflection any time of the day. And reading the thrilling, adventurous, and mystical story of Shiga will just add more faith to your daily experience of the mystery of the universe.
Welcome back, everyone. If you're just joining us now, my name is Julianne Meyer, and I am the host of Own Your Wellness. And today's special guest is Jennifer Peavey. Let's bring her back. Hello, hello. Welcome back.
Hello, glad to be here.
So before the commercial break, we sort of touched on some of what you're offering, but you have something brand new, and I'd love for you to share about that and how people can get it.
Yes, so I have just finished or just about to launch the audiobook for Natural Reflectors. Yes. And it was one of those experiences, much like writing it, although I had an editor. This time I actually did the recording. So,
oh, wow.
Yes, so it was a fabulous thing. Fortunately, I live 2 blocks from a major, R1 university, and was able to go to the library there and rent a studio.
Nice.
About 20 hours. And I learned very quickly that I should not record more than an hour and a half at a time because you get to the point that is just too much. And even on the way over, then there were these warm-ups, and I'm sure my neighbors thought I was absolutely insane because I would walk over there. I'm just 2 blocks away, and I'm singing as I go along to get across over there, over to the studio. But it was a really amazing experience to be able to put all that together. And then they had the publisher that I'm with have a set of engineers. So that was the only part I had to do, is just make the raw assets. But then to see what they did with it, I'm like, who is that? Like the editing of the text, you're like, who wrote that? That was really good. I wonder if I could meet that person.
I love that. I've done that with my own writing sometimes. I'll go back years later and be like, this is really, oh wait, I did this.
Yes. Well, I learned, I mean, the revisions, like with the text itself, there were 7 revisions. So, but what was kind of neat this time, even between all of the revisions, they would have us read the text out loud so that you could hear it, because if it rolls off your tongue, then it very likely is written better than if you didn't.
Yeah.
What was amazing though this time was, okay, I'm not changing the text, I'm just reading it. It was amazing how often that the lessons would come back for me, almost like I wrote this book for me. So I don't know if I need to do this yearly, because there were many times I went, oh, I've forgotten that, and you're doing it again. Because it did start out as basically my journey when I wrote this book, or when I was creating the structure, I was creating a workbook, or at least my structure, my own workbook. And when I was showing it to people, that's how they came back. This particular publisher came back and said, really, you need to broaden this about people developing their own process. So it was neat to be able to go back and go, yeah, I need to revisit some things. So it's nice to go back.
Yeah, it's funny how as a coach, because that's what I do, it seems like whatever it is I'm coaching is something I'm learning too. I mean, it's something I know and it's something I've taught, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's funny how people and, things just come back into our lives to reiterate the lessons that we've already learned.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you can always go deeper too,
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So people can go to jenniferpeavey.com, and what can they find here?
So there will be a number of links. Right now it's the paperback and the ebook, because I'm still waiting on the audiobook, and so that'll end up out there. And then also I do have a journal. That matching journal link is out there as well. That's on Amazon. So they can find that there. And they also can actually see pictures of the artwork. So I do have that.
That's amazing. Yeah. No, I like that people have the opportunity to immerse themselves into, how to do something different and new, maybe possibly, or even, further their own journey in a way that makes it more meaningful for them. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I emphasize is, every person has their own tendencies, and finding out what works for them. It might be like, do you work better in the morning? Do you work better in the afternoon? Whatever. Those could be a very simple thing. One of the things I've been really noticing by doing the annual process and following the seasons is that, when it's warmer and lighter outside, I am a lot more motivated. So even like today, or like yesterday with the spring, this is when I do my New Year's resolutions. I don't do them in January. I don't want to do them in January. And I'll fail miserably doing them in January. But right now, I am more than happy to eat more vegetables and eat lighter because it's warmer outside. And so being able to align myself, so to speak, with what feels more natural, it's something I think that requires some time to be able to reflect. You have to be able to take some time to be able to listen to what are those things that work better for you.
Something that you said that I just really want to touch on is a lot of people, spend their whole lives trying to do something or be something or fit themselves into being a certain way. When, if you're not a morning person, you're not a morning person. So, you can adjust some things if you need to, but doing it for the sake of doing it or because it's popular just doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Why not work with how you already are and maximize that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it should be on maximizing that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think working harder is the way to go. It's
No,
about,
it really isn't. You don't want to get to the end of your life and be like, whoo, I'm so glad I worked extra hard.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who would want to be like that. But, something that comes to mind is I have this obsession with eating raw food, and I've always had an obsession with eating raw food, and I can do it most of the time. But, the thing is I like my warm food too. And I like my cooked food, especially during the winter time. And I finally just gave up trying to do it year round and trying to do it 24 hours a day, because it just doesn't work for me. My body's been telling me for years, no, I don't like this.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you know, but I mean, I do incorporate more of the natural and raw foods, because that is what, you know, I want to do. But at the same time, it's like, okay, you know, I tried it the way that I thought it should be and it didn't work. So let's do something that works better.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I love that. So what kind of tips would you want to give to somebody who, you know, maybe wants to start using the moon as their own personal calendar to get things done?
Well, I think for me, part of it was I started with just saying, okay, what would the phases mean to me? What are the definitions? And I started off with a definition. And a lot of it was, okay, I'm going to spend more time when it's dark, when the new moon, than I'm going to spend thinking about things. I'm going to spend time reflecting on it. And what ended up happening was that happened for about a month. And then I found that because of that cycle to it, I could see a pattern. Now, part of it for me was it was a pattern that aligned with the design process, which meant there was a moment where I was doing research, which was first I'm reflecting, setting an attention, and then I was doing research. Then I was making a prototype. Then I was refining that prototype. Then I was assessing how that went. And then I was presenting it to the client. So it was at some point, it was to stop and say, what did I just do? And then what do I think about it? And I literally would stop, because it was very interesting when I did that. I've always been very good at critique, but I never did it for myself. And so this opportunity to sit there and say, this is what I think about it, and this is what I think should be done. And just really parsing out those two things separately was a huge aha moment for me. And then there's a time of documenting and a time of cleaning up and a time of rest. That is what worked for me. But I could imagine somebody taking those 8 divisions of the moon and saying, okay, what is happening in here in this cycle? Because at the same time, I found there were multiple things happening. It was not only reflection and action. It was to-do lists versus, like, when it's the full moon and a lot of action, there were a lot of to-do lists. When there was a lot more reflection, I needed to be free-flowing, you know, and I don't just sit down and I'm going to journal right now. Sometimes there is this moment where I just don't feel like it right now. I need to go have a cup of tea and I need to be quiet for a little while. And then I will think about journaling. You know, it's like you've got to create a space and have some freedom to it. I also, in those times, don't need to know what time it is. And so it's really difficult if I have things on my calendar during those times. There are other times where I just want to be freewheeling. So like that prototyping phase, I'll be like, you just go for it. I'll make sure in that pre-phase of research that I've got all the materials together. I'm not waiting for anything. But then there's this time where I completely wipe the calendar free and I get to be able to just do in that space. So it's assigning tasks or assigning boundaries to those particular phases that allowed me to progress forward. And I think that's a good thing for somebody to do, is to say, what works for me? And it might be that you start with just, I've got to think about it, or I'm going to act on it. And that, it probably was 5 or 6 months of my going back, or cycles that I was going back and saying, okay, I'm going to add this. Okay, then I'm going to add this. Let me think about that. And focus on all of those things. And so it took some time. So that's part of it too, is being patient, that this is going to go through iterations. And you're going to try some things out, and some of it's going to work and some of it's not. But the question is, why didn't it work? It's not that you need to force it, but it might tell you what to try next based upon what didn't work. I think there's a lot more to learn actually in the failure than there is in the success.
There really is, but nobody wants to fail.
It didn't feel right, or it didn't.
Yeah. But if you don't think of it as failure, then it's okay if it just doesn't work out the way you thought it would. You know, it's kind of funny how our perception totally changes how we feel about how things happen, when it's just like, you know, it's kind of like, and I love this example of the rain, you know, Rain is just rain, but to a bride who has an outdoor wedding that day, that is an absolute curse. But to a farmer who hasn't had any water on his crops in a month, it's a blessing. But the fact is, either way, it's still rain. So, I like that idea of sort of just letting it be what it is. And I mean, in theory, I'm not that great at just letting things be. I attach my feelings to things all the time, but I like the idea of it.
And that was one of the things as well. Lots of times I'll ask people, how do you feel about it? And they'll tell me what they think.
Oh, fascinating.
They'll substitute in, they'll say, I feel that person was mean, and it wasn't, they don't tell me how they feel. And so it was interesting as well. In this time period, was having somebody define feelings as a physical sensation. Not what you logically think about it. And so part of my time in reflection was to say, where did I feel that particular? And lots of times it's something that maybe happened before. Was I happy? Was I angry? And I'll go through what happened, but then I'll start to look at what the physical sensation was, because your body doesn't lie.
No.
Your body will tell you what's going on. You can logic your way out of anything or into anything. But your body will tell you the quality of the choice. Are you even happy with the options that are in front of you? And then you're able to make a decision from there based upon, how do you want to feel?
That's a beautiful thing to think about too, because I know most of us just try and avoid certain things. And most people don't take the time to go back and look and see what works and what doesn't, because they don't want to possibly have any sort of uncomfortableness. So, that seems to be like a huge part that's missing for a lot of people. I'm going to point at myself because I know I've done that in the past. So, but
and I'll be honest, I mean, the pandemic was something that allowed me to have the space to do it. And it wasn't just the fact that it was the pandemic, March 2020. It was the fact that it was so long that I not only was able to try some things, but there was enough time to let them stick. Because it's requiring different thought patterns and different habits, because it's 21 days to a habit. So each one of these things, okay, let's try another 21 days, another 21 days. And there was enough for that.
Something that I keep coming back to is, with the phases, especially with the moon, it's like, it answers so many questions for me about myself if I really think about it, because there's certain times I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I'm like super schedule oriented. And then other times I blow it off and I'm like making myself wrong because I just can't follow my schedule to save my life. I mean, if I need to work, then I'll go to work, for example. But other than that,
right.
I mean, if there's no deadline, then I'll put it off or what, unless I feel like doing it.
And so it'd be really nice if you could see that pattern, and maybe it follows the moon, maybe it doesn't. But if you're able to see the pattern, then you're able to say, you know what, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Because for me, at least, it was then I'm not beating myself up. Oh, you didn't get that done. You have this huge to-do list and you didn't do anything about it.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people tend to do that. It's like, you decide, okay, this is how I'm going to, run my life now. And then if it doesn't go exactly according to plan, then all of a sudden you've got this whole conversation in your head going on about how awful of a person you are, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, no, maybe you just not built that way. It's kind of like when I found out that teenagers, their internal clock, is built differently. So they it naturally sleep later. It's not that they're lazy. Right. It has nothing to do with laziness. It's just how they're physically built. And it's normal for them because their internal clock is set differently. So, once I learned that, I was like, okay, well, maybe trying to get a teenager up before the sun isn't probably going to be the most productive for them anyway. So something to think about, it's like,
there's a school system.
I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but I'm just referring to like, if I can show a teenager that kind of grace now, why can't I show myself that kind of grace?
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I talk about in the book and talked on other podcasts is the idea of the elite among us. Now, whether that's a professional athlete or a musician or entertainer, there's always, and we expect it, that they are very intense on game day. And we expect that there's all this preparation and there's all this recovery. But yet, most Americans are in front of a computer 14 hours a day, eating lunch right there in front of it, maybe even dinner, and they're not allowing for there to be a break or a preparation or saying, this is my performance day and I therefore need to prepare and recover from it. We're allowing ourselves to go through a subpar performance.
Exactly.
Instead of considering ourselves to be, okay, I am the elite at what I do.
Ooh, I like that idea.
Yeah.
I am the elite at what I do.
Yeah.
And, speaking of that, it's kind of like people think of things like vacation as, some bonus thing where, it's, you're lucky to have it. But for me, it's turned into this thing where I need that in order to do my best.
Yes.
It's not a matter of a luxury. It's not that.
Yes. Yes.
It is required for me to be and do my best. And so, changing that perception of like days off, time off, or even, that relaxation and rest period as, like you said, being part of the process, then that's pretty amazing when you can come to that realization that that is what it takes to be the best at what you're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things there are a number of times in this process that I wondered what I was doing and how was I getting through. And I found that I needed about an hour in the morning. And there's a cup of tea and there's a time of journaling and there's a time of checking in with my body. I do some yoga, and I've even learned I cannot do yoga throughout the day because I'll just mess it all up. I need to do it during this time as well. And there are times that, it takes me to 9:30 before I'm done. And I feel guilty that I'm starting my day late. But just like what you said about the vacation, if I don't do this, my day is going to be messed up. And so I know that I will get more done and be more productive if I give myself this time. And not beat myself up for doing it. So.
And I think too, that a lot of us have this perception that it's like an 8-hour workday. Whereas if you actually are focused and doing what you need to do, it doesn't, and this isn't for everybody, but I'm just saying like a lot of people, you can get more done in 2 hours than 8, just because of, because you've taken care of yourself and because you've done these things and, you're more productive in that sense. And there's a lot of research out there that supports that. Now, like I said before, it's not necessarily true for everybody, but, I just think that that's something to consider when you're, figuring out how you want your life to be, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think we all could look at our calendars and go, how many meetings did I have? And was I actually producing what needed to be done during those meetings?
Yeah. And, it's kind of funny too, because being an entrepreneur myself, it's like, am I doing things that are actually, getting me somewhere to where, like reaching my goals, or am I just filling my day with things? Do I need to really be doing this?
Yeah. In fact, no is a very, I think we said that earlier too. No is a valid answer, but it's time to decide. It's harder to let things go, I think, than it is to pick things up.
It is. Yeah. Or even, and something else I love to talk about too, is just because something is good doesn't mean it's good for you. And
just because you can do it.
Just because you can doesn't mean it's going to be in your best interest to do it. And, so you got to be like, I just kind of feel like a lot of people don't protect their focus. They don't protect. And when I say focus, I even refer to like that rest time, because it's like all of a sudden it's like, okay, I've got this time off. Well, I'm going to do this instead. No, that is part of your process. There's a time for everything. So
absolutely,
you can figure out when that is for you. But we are beginning to run out of time. So I want to make sure that people can reach you as well. What can we find here at Jennifer.thebblacklab?
Yes. So that's my social media handle. So you'll find me at Facebook and Instagram through that. And that's, you're able to follow me. And then there's a Linktree link, particularly at the at Instagram, where you can find deeper information, like a Medium article series, that type of thing.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I'm assuming that, yeah. And then, so they can also link to your website from there as well, correct?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And this
and
is
then
the
to
best.
Amazon.
Okay, perfect. And this is the best way to just really see what all your different offerings are, is through the website.
Definitely.
Perfect.
Definitely. But then if you want to, I don't necessarily have the blog there, but if you just want to follow, and because really what I've been doing in 2022 is just talking about what I'm doing. Because that's one of the things I'm working on, the workbook, the real workbook, and digitizing what I did, not only with the moon, but with the year and the seasons. But I talk about, okay, well, this is what I'm doing and this is what it's for. And then post some questions, kind of the questions I would pose to myself. I pose them out there. And so, if you just want to dip your toe in, that's a good way to do it.
I love that idea. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Happiness Project. It was a book that was written a while ago, and I loved it because she just talked about herself, but also was like, okay, you can do this too, and sort of gave like all these different ways and ideas. And that's what I'm hearing that you are doing as well, because and to me, that's just the best, because it gets people interested. In what's possible and the humanness in it, and it's like, okay, I'm not doing this by myself anymore.
Right.
And I got somebody to do this. Yeah. No, I love that.
I found that with a couple of workshops is that, so here are the prompts, think about this, and then I'll tell about mine. So part of it is also putting my vulnerability out there and saying, this is what I'm doing. And it allows people then to feel free, maybe not to share with me, but to share with themselves. This idea of we were saying earlier about being brave, about going back to some place that there might be some uncomfortable feelings. It's really nice to say, well, I saw this and wow, wasn't that something that I'm still doing that? I need to write that. In fact, earlier when we were talking about the audiobook, going, yeah, I still need to go back and read it again. Because I wrote the book doesn't mean I'm the master of it. It just means it was part of my journey.
Exactly. No, and I think that that's a beautiful point too, and that it's a journey. We always think that once we have this, then all of a sudden all these things will magically go away or be perfect, but it's literally about the journey. And so don't miss it, when you're trying to get somewhere.
Right. And there are days I wonder, does it ever end? Kind of like social media. Does it ever end?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we only have about a minute or two left. Is there any final thoughts that you'd love to share with our audience today?
So I think the big thing is, if you choose to take on this idea of creating your own personal process, is let it be a journey. Let it be something that you're going to try some things out, and be gentle with yourself, because it's going to feel uncomfortable. There are going to be times where you thought you knew what you're doing and it didn't turn out like you expected. And there will be the voice that's going to say, give it up, you failed, or whatever it is, but be gentle and say, this is why, there's some reason you want to do it. You have an intention. For me, it was, I want to be happy. I want to feel that I have a full life and that I'm doing what I wanted to do, that I am happy with the choices that I've made. And I will say, I'm being very honest, I'm at a point where, yes, everything in my life is something of my choosing. And I will say that I like it. My next is, I want to love it.
I like that.
So, it's not a light switch. So that's part of the reality of it, but you're worth it.
Yes, absolutely. And on that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Jennifer. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you back. Thank you so much.
So glad to be here. It's good to see you again, Julianne.
You as well. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
And that is all the time that we have for today's show. We will see you again later this week. Have a good one, everyone.